This is a clip from one of our recent live streams. We stream live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. As a reminder, this is our second channel, Fish the Moment Live. Our main channel, Fish the Moment, is where we have all of our highly edited YouTube content. We spend 30 to 40 hours a week producing one YouTube video that's posted on the Fish the Moment channel every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. These videos include on-the-water footage of us actually fishing, as well as detailed instruction on how to use electronics, fish offshore, and a lot of other great information. Make sure to check out the Fish the Moment channel if you enjoy the content on this channel. Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, my goal is to convince Randy to give up shallow water fishing and become an offshore angler. Don't know how well that's going to go, but we're going to talk about what it would take for Randy to ditch the bank and live offshore, trying to catch his fish off the bank. I think it'll be an interesting episode. Hopefully you guys will learn something about how I would go about trying to transition someone who is a shallow water expert into an offshore angler. And then probably next week we'll maybe flip it around. Randy will try to convince me to abandon the offshore game and go up shallow. So it should be a couple fun live streams here. Randy, how's it going tonight? How are you feeling about this topic?
Doing good, Johnny. Man, I don't know about that. It's just, you beat me so bad last summer in our challenges offshore that, it's probably not going to take much to convince me that I need to be offshore. But as far as actually doing it and getting that flipping stick out of my hand, it could be a little bit more challenging than that. Because, man, I just love getting in that shallow water and catching them.
Well, it's definitely a mentality change, and we'll kind of get into what are the things that make someone a good shallow water fisherman versus an offshore fisherman, what mentality shifts Randy would have to make, skills he would have to develop, all these different things to make that change, and also if it's worth it. I want to talk about a little bit about the time investment you would need to make that happen, the equipment you might need to get to make that happen. There's a lot of things that go into it, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have been thinking about trying to fish more away from the bank. And when we talk about offshore fishing, we're not talking about like going fishing in the ocean. We're talking about going in a lake and fishing away from the shoreline, out in the middle of the lake where you can't see any visible targets. And when you try to do that, it's daunting for a lot of guys, very intimidating. But you might watch guys on the Bassmaster Elite Series, watch YouTube videos, whatever, and you see them just absolutely crushing them offshore, catching a ton of fish, and it seems like if you could figure it out, it's the thing to do. And there's definitely times when it's great, as Randy mentioned. Sometimes if I can figure them out in our challenges, it can get pretty ugly, but it's also not the easiest thing in the world. So we're going to break it all down. But before we do that, just want to say hi to everyone on the stream. Got Jesse, Colby, Timo, Darren, Alan, Eric, John, Jacob. Good to see everyone in here. I saw a funny comment here, Randy. Let me read this here. He said, let me find this. This was a really good one. It was from Brent. He said, told the wife I had my college fishing class tonight.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a good deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to it and start talking about Randy. So first up, my first question to you is, Randy, why aren't you fishing offshore right now? Like, obviously you fish tournaments, you fish the opens, and you choose to go fish up shallow in your tournaments. Why do you choose to do that versus trying to be versatile and go do some offshore, some shallow, like do a little bit of both?
Yeah, I'll sort of, in order to answer that question, Johnny, I've got to go back in time and sort of lead you to where we got to right now. But believe it or not, guys, I was like a pioneer in offshore fishing around this part of the country. And I'll tell you how it happened. I grew up fishing Grand Lake my whole life, fished it forever. And back in the early 90s, this has been like 1990, 1991. This is back when David Fritz was starting to really dominate fishing offshore cranking. And this is back when you had flashers, paper map, compass, that type of stuff. And he was a master at triangulating offshore structure, and he dominated. I mean, he won Angler of the Year, I think, a couple times, Bass Angler of the Year. That won the Classic, and so that was sort of on the horizon, but nobody really could figure out how to do it. I was riding down Grand Lake, down the middle of the lake in Horse Creek, about 35 years ago, and I had a flasher, and I was headed back in the creek to flip some willows in the back of this bay. And I was in the middle of the lake, And all of a sudden, I'm looking at my depth finder, and it was about 13 or 14 feet. And then all of a sudden, it dropped off just real quick, just boom, boom, like that. And I'm like, what the heck was that? It's like I couldn't figure out what I just happened. And this was back before. I mean, we had topo maps, but there wasn't any detail on the topo maps. It was like there was nothing on the topo map that showed anything. So I idled back. I shut the boat down. I idled back around, and I went back and forth and back and forth. And I finally found this. It was a little bitty drop off where the water went from like 12 feet deep down to 16 feet, real sharp, and it was small. It was only like maybe 30 foot wide. And so anyway, I dropped a marker buoy down there and picked up a deep diving crankbait, and it was every cast a giant. It's like I sat there for I don't know how many 20-pound bags, and I was just fun fishing that I culled. There was a gigantic school of bass on this piece of cover out there. And so for the next couple of years, I won about every tournament that was down there in the summertime of the year, buddy tournaments. I won some of the big bass tournaments, and I expanded it all over the lake. Nobody was doing it. So I would just idle around with my flasher and my map, and I would look at the bank contours visually, and then I would get out there and I'd graph it with my flasher, throw out marker buoys, and I had a bunch of offshore spots. So I sort of got the reputation for 2 or 3 years of being this Johnny Schultz Jr. offshore guru back before anyone else was doing it. But what happened is GPS came out shortly after that, like 3 or 4 years after that. And as soon as GPS came out, I had all these areas that I had to myself immediately got covered up. People were seeing me out on these spots. They'd go investigate in it. More people saw me out there. GPS came out, improved mapping came out, and people started finding all this stuff.
If you enjoy our videos and want more in-depth instruction about bass fishing, check out our virtual seminars on fishthemoment.com. On our virtual seminars page, you'll see all of our upcoming live seminars, including our advanced summer jig fishing seminar focused on both offshore and shallow jig fishing. Randy and I will give you our best secrets in terms of bait modifications, areas, retrieves, and a lot of other great information. You can also find recordings of our past seminars. We'll be updating our library every single week with past seminars that will help you become a better bass fisherman. Check them out on fishthemoment.com.
What happened at that point, getting back to your initial question, is why I don't do it now, is that there became a race. It's like all of a sudden this offshore technology, this offshore way of fishing, it accelerated at just a lightning pace. And on top of that, the electronic technology was keeping up with that same pace as the angler knowledge. And every year it got more difficult to find those spots that other people weren't fishing. It got more difficult to afford the technology. You got one piece of equipment, the next year they came out with something else that made it obsolete. And to answer your question, Johnny, I just got tired of the rat race. I got tired of there being somebody on these spots that I had to myself for years. I got tired of buying an electronic unit and it's obsolete the next year. And then that just got me fishing back to the bank more. So it was really odd that I sort of developed a lot of this stuff around this part of the country, and then I got left behind on it because I didn't keep up with the technology. So that's sort of that's why we're at where we are now.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm just going to share my screen a little bit, guys, to show you what Randy's talking about. Here's an area. I'm just kind of over by the Sailboat Bridge area here on Grand Lake, Randy, because I know that's an area you probably were spending some time in. And what Randy's talking about is like now you can go onto the Navionics web app on the internet for free and get a super detailed contour line map of all these areas on Grand Lake where you have these drop-offs. These are all the areas Randy was talking about where you have a drop from 11 feet of water to 30 feet of water. This is the stuff that Randy was finding with his flasher back in the day, and now you can just clearly see it. If you understand how to read a contour map, it's super easy to find. If you don't know how to read a contour map, just head over to the main Fish the Moment YouTube channel. I just made a video explaining every single type of structure on a contour map, explaining where to find ledges, humps, points. So go to the main Fish the Moment channel. I have a video there covering that for you. But basically, what Randy's talking about is that you used to be able to go to these spots, and they were completely molested by anybody. You could literally go and find these areas out in the middle of nowhere, and those fish were so easy to catch because no one was fishing them. Well, now, because guys have the electronics, they have the ability to find them, look for them, all that stuff, all the obvious areas, all the easy schools of fish to catch are completely covered up, and they're hard to get those fish to bite. And honestly, what happens is that the fish offshore are just as pressured as the fish up shallow, but the only problem with that is that the fish offshore are a lot harder to find at times than the fish up shallow, or at least maybe not harder to find, but they take more of a time investment. And I know one thing that we've talked about a lot, Randy, with the shallow water fishing is that you are now an expert at bait selection. You can go and find these fish up shallow. You can use a unique bait, a different bait modification with your jig or whatever it is, a lighter weight, a different crankbait, and you can trigger fish to bite even in these highly pressured areas. And the same thing happens offshore. And really the advantage I had growing up is that I was getting into the offshore game right when it was kind of hitting its like the peak of its like acceleration, where it was like the knowledge wasn't quite out there to everyone. I could still find a lot of good spots on contour maps and still catch the fish, but it was getting to the point where people were starting to figure it out. It wasn't as much of a secret anymore, and I had to start employing unique baits, unique retrieves, approaches. I had to better understand all these offshore areas using bass behavior, using my electronics to catch fish on areas that were receiving a lot of pressure. And I think that's probably what happened with you, Randy, is you were seeing all these guys fishing these spots, and you couldn't just pick up a crankbait, throw down there, and catch him. But if you maybe back in the day had a hair jig or had a drop shot or something, you could have gone to those same spots and wrecked them right behind those guys with a different approach, maybe using a different casting angle. But back then you probably hadn't really had that figured out. So that's how the offshore game has changed so much, guys, is that there's so much more detail to it, and you have to have so many different skills to make it work. Does that sound about right to you, Randy? Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you left a like on the video. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and gets these videos out to more people. Also consider subscribing. It's free and it lets you get notifications of every single one of our videos that we upload daily. Finally, remember to check out the main Fish the Moment channel, where we actually have on-the-water fishing footage as well as detailed graphics on electronics, offshore fishing, bass behavior, and a lot of other great information. Thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you on the next one.